Now, our first story is an NBA update for anybody who has been under a rock for the last few weeks. The NBA is currently between a rock and a hard place. The rock and the hard place, of course, being the United States public and Chinese censors. As you most probably know, this all began when Rockets general manager Daryl Morey released a tweet a few weeks ago supporting the Hong Kong protests. In response to this, there was a huge Chinese backlash where the Rockets lost all their sponsorship in China. The NBA came out and apologized, but then they received backlash back in the United States from fans, regular Americans, and politicians who saw that as an example of selling out American values to get into overseas markets. The NBA then changed their stance, supporting Morey's freedom of expression and saying they were not going to punish or fire the general manager. This resulted in a straight-up ban in China for the NBA. So where are we now? Well, things are still very much up in the air. The Chinese have quieted down a little bit on that side, and the commissioner of the NBA, Adam Silver, gave an interview at the Time 100 Health Summit where he brought up a couple of interesting points. First of all, he said that what has happened with China is going to cost the NBA a lot of money. It's going to suffer a substantial financial blow, but the league can take it in order to support freedom of expression. Two, Silver said that the Chinese side had put pressure on the NBA to fire or punish Daryl Morey for his tweets, something that Silver said the NBA was not going to do, and that they stand behind the freedom of expression of all of their people. What's also interesting is on Friday morning, the Wall Street Journal released a report where they looked into research that is being conducted into the tweets that were tweeted at Daryl Morey after his initial tweet supporting Hong Kong. The finding of this research shows that the vast majority of the tweets that attacked Morey after this tweet were relatively new or brand new. The expert who they were speaking to in the Wall Street Journal said that though he could not say for sure whether this was a state-sponsored online attack, it did show all the signs of a state-sponsored action online. While we're on the topic of the NBA, we should bring up, of course, LeBron James, who was in the doghouse this week with fans and people around the world who are not very happy with his stance on the Hong Kong protests when he came out and said that Daryl Morey was not educated on the subject and should not have spoken. This caused a backlash in Hong Kong, in the United States, and this has probably been a tough week for him. I'm sure he will get over it though. We should also talk about the Chinese reaction. Now, the initial Chinese reaction was very, very strong, basically telling the NBA that they needed to apologize, and this sort of behavior was not acceptable for any company that wants to make a profit in the People's Republic of China. Since then, however, it seems that a lot of the state-run media have taken their pedal off the gas and have cooled down some of the rhetoric. In fact, there have been some reports and commentaries coming out in the state media calling for Chinese people to calm down a little bit. So does this mean China has changed its views on overseas companies expressing their freedom of expression? Not really. This situation is somewhat unique. There are several reasons why, in this particular case, the Chinese state media might not want to be too fiery with its rhetoric and might want to be a little bit more low-key in their approach to the NBA. One, last week was an important week for US-China relations because Liu He, the vice premier of the People's Republic of China, was in Washington trying to negotiate a interim trade deal, which we'll discuss later in this episode. Two, the NBA is not like other companies from the US. The NBA essentially has a monopoly on this type of sport, the top basketball league in the world, essentially. And there are hundreds of millions of viewers in China who enjoy this game. So it's not like a flight company or an apparel brand that can just be replaced. Three, there is a lot of money involved. We have to remember that it's not just our Western capitalist systems that are susceptible to economic influence. There are big players in China involved that are politically connected, that don't want to lose billions of dollars because they have lucrative deals with the NBA going forward, including massive tech companies like Tencent. Another reason to keep in mind was that this was a really big deal. A lot of regular people, including regular Americans, were following this story. Politicians were beginning to get involved because of that attention. And finally, it's also worth keeping in mind that the Winter Olympics are coming up in a couple of years, and some commentators have pointed out that it is not a good look for Beijing to be banning entire sporting leagues when they're ramping up for a massive international sporting event like the Olympics. Regardless of what happens here, there is still going to be a lot of pressure on American companies going forward to balance the values that they have in the United States versus their desire to get into that China market. And the NBA will not be the final company to suffer financial loss